The boy excitedly showed his invention to his father. He stuck a small windmill into the ground. Then he removed the battery from a radio. To his surprise, the radio still played clearly. Seeing the shock on his father's face, he quickly explained that it was powered by wind. As long as wires were connected, the spinning blades could generate electricity and make the radio work. If they built a larger one, he said, it could even power a water pump. They could draw water from the well and irrigate their fields. It might even solve the long drought. But to finish the invention, he would need parts from his father's only bicycle. Even though the idea sounded impressive, his father thought it was unrealistic. He scolded the boy harshly. Those words completely enraged his father, a farmer who had never gone to school himself. In a burst of anger, he slammed the windmill onto the ground. Then he shouted at William, "From today on, I don't want to see you wasting time on these useless ideas. It's time you learned how to farm." After his father walked away, William stared at the broken invention he had worked so hard on. He could not hold back his tears. The next morning, he did what his father told him. He woke up early and went to the fields to work. He worked until noon before finally resting, but he never gave up learning. Whenever he had time, he helped people in the village repair their radios. This allowed him to study how machines worked, while also earning a little money to help his family. One day his father happened to see him doing this. He said nothing. He simply took a radio outside and listened to the weather report. Recently the weather had seemed good. The harvest should have been decent, but no one could have imagined what would happen next. Before long, the villagers were blinded by money and made a terrible decision. It triggered the worst famine the region had seen in 20 years. One day when William came home, he found a school uniform lying on his bed. It turned out that his father's harsh words earlier had only been said in anger. He knew his son loved learning, so even though the family was extremely poor, he still managed to gather enough money for William's middle school tuition. On the first day of school, heavy rain poured from the sky. It felt like a good omen. Back in the classroom, the science teacher began the lesson, but after school, the teacher suddenly stopped William and told him to pay the rest of his tuition soon. William was confused. After asking more questions, he finally learned the truth. His father had only paid the first installment. William felt heartbroken, but there was nothing he could do. By the time he got home, the sky was already getting dark. He sat by the window, working on a science quiz. Just then his mother walked in. She told him the kerosene lamp had run out of fuel. The room became too dark to see. William had no choice but to stop his unfinished homework and go help his father with chores. As a result, when the test came the next day, he only scored 62. It was just enough to pass, but he was far from satisfied. So after school, William went with his friends to the junkyard. The place was filled with things thrown away by a tobacco company. They searched for a long time. In the end, William only found an old water pump and some dead batteries, nothing that could help him study at night. On the way home, William ran into the village chief, holding a meeting with the villagers. A tobacco company wanted to buy timber for just $1.50 per ton. The price was ridiculously low. Both the chief and William's father opposed the deal, but the villagers lined up to sign the contract anyway. They were simply too poor. Soon the company began cutting down the trees. William watched it happen and worried deeply, but there was nothing he could do. To clear his mind, he went to visit a friend. They were listening to a soccer match on the radio. Suddenly the radio died. All eyes turned to William. At that moment, he immediately understood what to do. He ran home through the rain, grabbed some old batteries and tools, and rushed back to his friend's house. Then he started working. Just as everyone hoped, William managed to power the radio again. The room exploded with excitement. From that moment on, William became something of a hero among his friends. After the game ended, he headed home. On the way, he accidentally saw his sister secretly dating the science teacher in their conservative village. This was something that could shame the entire family. The next day after school, William and his friends went to the teacher's bicycle. At first, they planned to damage the tires to teach him a lesson, but after thinking about it, kind-hearted William could not bring himself to do it. One of his friends then suggested another idea. Why not take the bike light? You could use it to study at night. William thought the idea sounded good, but when he tried to remove it, he noticed a small silver device connected to the light. When the pedals turned, the wheel rubbed against the device, and amazingly, the light came on. William was stunned. At that moment, a new idea lit up his mind, and that beam of light illuminated the path to his future. After returning home, William made a promise with his father. Once the crops were harvested, his father would pay the rest of his school tuition. But fate had other plans. A series of violent rainstorms suddenly arrived, without trees to protect the land. The fields his father had worked so hard to plant were completely flooded. No matter how desperately he tried to save them, the crops were all destroyed. Not a single ear of corn was left. With no money for tuition, William had no choice but to stop going to school. Not long after, the storms finally ended, but what followed was an even harsher blow. A blazing sun scorched reached the land, the soil dried up, the young corn plants withered and died. The village was now facing a long famine. Worried sick, William's father went to see the village chief. He asked the chief for a favor. When the president came to the village to campaign, he hoped the chief would tell him the truth about the disaster. Maybe the government would offer help. Otherwise, sooner or later, everyone would starve. After hearing this, the chief reluctantly agreed. At the same time, the clever William had already begun thinking of a solution. He gathered several dead batteries and connected their positive and negative ends together. In this way, he could combine them into one usable battery. Then, if he connected the battery to the water pump, they could draw water from the well and irrigate the land. But there was still one major problem. How could he charge the battery? Determined to understand how the bicycle light generated power, William secretly sneaked into the school. He found the science teacher and asked, "Why does your bicycle light turn on when you pedal?" The teacher replied that the bike used a DC generator. William immediately asked how to build one, but the teacher admitted he was not entirely sure about the exact mechanics. Instead, he suggested that William search for the answer in the library. With the teacher's help, William soon found a book called Using Energy. The contents fascinated him. From that day on, William spent every spare moment studying the book. When he was not reading, he was searching the junkyard for anything that might be useful. Before long, the day arrived when the president came to campaign for the villagers. It felt like a small spark of hope. When the meeting began, the village chief stepped onto the stage. First, he praised the president enthusiastically. Only then did he explain the real problem. The land had become dry and barren. The crops had failed. He asked the new president to help solve the long drought. Only then, he said, would he give him his vote? But before he could finish speaking, the chief was suddenly dragged away by the president's bodyguards. William sensed something was wrong. He and his friends followed quietly. What they saw shocked them. The chief was brutally beaten. It was clear that the corrupt president had no intention of helping them. Once the situation became awkward, he quickly got into his car and left. At that moment, William's father finally understood the truth. No one was coming to save them. They could only rely on themselves. But because of the terrible weather, the family had harvested only a few ears of corn that year, and the next harvest was still a full year away. There was no way that little food could keep the whole family alive. With no other choice, his father removed the metal sheets from their roof and took them to town to sell. But when he arrived, he discovered something even worse. The price of grain had risen several times over. Just then, the radio broadcast another piece of news. The government was denying that any disaster had happened. Furious, William's father climbed onto a truck, heading to a protest in town. He told his wife and children to wait at home for good news. Determined to end the famine as soon as possible, William secretly slipped into the school library again. He told a female teacher about his plan. "If we can get the science teacher's generator," he explained, "we can pump water even during the dry season. Then we can grow food and no one will starve." After hearing his idea, the teacher thought it might actually work. She told William to find the science teacher, but when William reached the classroom, the teacher was not there. In fact, the science teacher was secretly meeting William's sister. They were planning to run away together. Inside the classroom, the principal had taken over the lesson. William quickly lowered his head, but it was too late. The principal had already spotted him.
Stand up!
My father will pay, sir.
You are stealing from the family of every remaining student in this school.
My father will pay, sir.
It turned out that the principal had never known. William had not paid his tuition. The science teacher had been hiding the truth. Now that the principal discovered William was attending school without paying, he was furious. On the spot, he expelled him. William was driven out of the classroom. The female teacher watched everything happen. She knew how much William loved learning. He was a bright and determined student, so she begged the principal to let William attend school for free. But the principal refused. When William returned home, he sat silently in front of the dry land. Just then, villagers suddenly ran past carrying buckets. The government, under public pressure, had finally delivered 2 truckloads of grain. It was meant to ease the famine. William's mother took out all their savings and told him to buy as much grain as possible. He quickly jumped onto his father's bicycle and rode toward town. At the same time, his father was riding back from town on a truck. Along the road, he saw villagers fighting desperately for food. The sight made him think of his wife and children at home. He urged the driver to go faster, but he was already too late. When he arrived, the starving villagers had broken into his house and taken all the food. His wife sat on the ground, crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, William finally reached the town. Because there was not enough grain, the scene had already turned chaotic. People were pushing and shouting everywhere, but thanks to his small size, William managed to squeeze into the warehouse. When he took out all the money he had, a worker told him that each person could only buy 30 pounds of grain, so William followed the rules and bought his share. But another problem appeared. How could he get out? Outside, the crowd had gone completely wild. If he walked out now, the grain would certainly be stolen. But staying inside was not a solution either. Sooner or later, the doors would be forced open. William walked around the warehouse, looking for a way out. By chance, he discovered a place where he could escape. It was already dark when William finally made it home. Because they only had one small sack of grain, his father made a difficult decision. From now on, the family would eat only one meal a day. Otherwise, the food would never last. Every day he also prayed to God, hoping rain would somehow arrive during the dry season. To William, this sounded almost absurd. If life was going to change, they had to do something themselves. That night, William spoke privately with his sister. He asked her for help. Through her, maybe they could borrow the science teacher's generator. If I can get it, he said, I can bring water to the village. After William left, his sister spent the whole night thinking. By morning, she had made a bold decision. A decision that would change William's life forever. So what happened next? Follow me, and I'll be sharing the rest of the story very soon.